straight into it. If you accept the McCann's guilt, you must also accept a chain of improbable choices, deliberate concealment, coordinated deception, and 17 years of silence from friends, family, and witnesses that runs counter to what we know about human behavior. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell to get first-hand updates as this story develops. To believe that Kate and Jerry McCann deliberately hid a fatal act requires imagining a long, tightly woven conspiracy. It imagines parents arranging for a child's body to be concealed or destroyed, coordinating a network of close friends to tell a single consistent story, enduring intense police scrutiny and hostile media attention without a single credible leak, and maintaining that secrecy for nearly 2 decades. That is not an argument based on sympathy. It is an argument from the ordinary mechanics of human behavior. Secrets of that magnitude typically unravel. People grow tired, resentful, frightened, or conscience-stricken. Over years, there are usually slips, recantations, or at least a single credible tip. What the public record shows instead is a patchwork of competing timelines, shifting witness recollections, contested scent alerts, and a very public, sustained campaign by the parents to find their daughter. Those facts complicate any neat criminal conspiracy narrative. Human memory is fallible and easily influenced, but it also tends to produce leaks when individuals are pressed together by shared stress and long-term consequences. Over 17 years, a coordinated silence on a secret that dramatic is statistically unlikely. A truly convincing case of parental guilt would therefore need physical evidence of a kind that is hard to disguise. Clear and uncontested DNA, blood evidence with an unbroken chain of custody, or a reliably time-stamped record directly linking the child's remains to a specific concealment action. That kind of corroboration is what separates plausible suspicion from near certainty. In the McCann case, the evidentiary record does not contain such unequivocal proof. When forensic testing is examined closely, the picture becomes more ambiguous. Some laboratory analyses cited in discussion of the case involve low copy number DNA samples or complex mixtures that forensic experts described as difficult to interpret confidently. In plain terms, samples taken and analyzed did not yield a straightforward, unambiguous match that would definitively place Madeleine's biological material in a way that supports a parental concealment theory. Complex DNA mixtures can arise in many contexts and are inherently challenging to attribute to a single individual without high degrees of certainty. That technical difficulty matters a great deal in a case where other evidence is sparse. Without a clear forensic link, theories must stand on less reliable foundations, such as recollection, scent detection, or circumstantial interpretation. Cadaver dogs became a prominent element in the public conversation early on. These dogs found scent signals that investigators interpreted as alerts in several locations, including the Holiday apartment and, according to some accounts, in a hire car. To people unfamiliar with forensic nuance, a dog alert can feel decisive and dramatic. But dogs detect scent signatures, not DNA, and their alerts require independent physical corroboration to be treated as proof. Dogs can point investigators toward places that merit closer scrutiny, but they cannot, by themselves, establish guilt. In a number of the instances often cited, the laboratory follow-up either returned complex results that were difficult to interpret or did not produce the clear physical confirmation that would be needed to convert an investigative lead into conclusive evidence. In many legal systems, canine alerts are investigative tools rather than courtroom proof, and in this case, they heighten suspicion without closing evidentiary gaps. Another central feature that fuels speculation is the behavior and testimony of the group known as the Tapas Seven, the friends dining together the evening Madeleine disappeared. They were close to the events and their accounts are crucial in reconstructing timelines. Who checked on the children, which doors were used, and when people moved between apartments. However, their statements contain inconsistencies. Small differences in time estimates, contrasting descriptions of door usage, and differing recollections about who saw or heard what contribute to a muddled chronology. That is unsurprising from a memory perspective, but significant in practical terms. When minutes matter, a 5 or 10-minute discrepancy can shift which scenarios seem plausible. The notion that 7 people could maintain a flawless, coordinated lie for years is hard to square with normal human behavior. People argue that shared social pressure, conversation, and the desire to protect one another can produce aligned narratives. But social reinforcement also tends to create pressure points where memories diverge or someone's retelling slips. That combination, apparent sameness in some phrases and detailed contradiction in other facts, is precisely what investigators reported and what has made the Tapa's 7 accounts both central and controversial. Where physical records like CCTV or phone metadata are absent or incomplete, the investigation becomes heavily dependent on fallible human recollection, and that dependence invites alternative interpretations. This case unfolded in a highly public environment, a tourist resort where neighbors, staff, and other holidaymakers moved through the same spaces, where local police and later international media descended quickly, and where the McCanns themselves became a prominent public presence as they campaigned, fundraised, and appealed for information. That level of exposure complicates any scenario that presumes long-term concealment. Concealing a body or hiding a major secret in a community under sustained attention increases the likelihood that someone uninvolved will notice. A maintenance worker will discover something during renovations, or a tip will eventually surface. The fact that the family was actively campaigning and visible in the months and years after the disappearance further reduces the plausibility of a secret concealed at home or nearby without detection. Skeptics might reply that public campaigning can be staged or that it could be used to deflect suspicion. But that argument runs into a practical problem. Extensive public activity increases, rather than reduces, the number of potential observers and the probability of inadvertent disclosure. If concealment were the objective, seeking media attention and public engagement would be counterproductive. Observers who defend the parents' innocence point to their sustained public efforts to find Madeleine. Appeals, interviews, private searches, and the establishment of a fund, as behavior consistent with trying to recover a missing child rather than hiding a crime. None of these actions are definitive proof of innocence, of course, but together they complicate a simplistic narrative of parental culpability. The role of certain investigators and commentators has also shaped public perception. One former Portuguese detective who led parts of the initial inquiry became an outspoken critic of the McCanns and later published a book arguing for their involvement. That individual's public campaign, book sales, and media presence have been polarizing. Supporters view the work as exposing uncomfortable truths, while critics point out procedural errors, alleged misconduct, and financial motives tied to sensationalizing the case. The public prominence of a former investigator who adopted a strongly accusatory stance has complicated the factual record because his claims mix interpretation with disputed evidence. When allegations come from someone who has benefited commercially or politically from a particular narrative, it is reasonable to weigh their assertions with caution and to demand independent corroboration. There is also criticism of investigative tunnel vision early in the process. Multiple retrospectives and commentators have argued that certain branches of the police investigation focused heavily on the parents to the potential exclusion of other lines of inquiry. Tunnel vision is a known hazard in policing. Once a theory finds traction, Confirmation bias can skew how evidence is prioritized and which leads receive attention. In the McCann investigation, that dynamic has been suggested by critics who say other credible possibilities, such as an opportunistic abductor with local knowledge or unrelated criminal activity in the area, were not pursued with equal vigor at crucial early moments. Whether that critique is fair in every respect is debated, but the concern underscores the need for broad investigative canvassing, especially when physical evidence is sparse. A practical and compounding difficulty was the limited or missing surveillance footage. Timestamped CCTV is among the most objective tools for reconstructing movement and filling gaps in human testimony. Where those records were available, they were often grainy, of poor quality, or later overwritten or not preserved in ways that could decisively clarify critical minutes. The absence of usable, contemporaneous recordings forced investigators to rely more heavily on human memory and fragmentary forensic hints, and that reliance magnified the impact of inconsistencies and uncertainties. Given the absence of decisive physical evidence pointing to a parental crime, one alternative explanation retains practical plausibility. An opportunistic predator who knew the resort's routines exploited predictable behavior and brief windows of vulnerability to take a child quickly and vanish. Such offenders often act on opportunity, using local knowledge to identify periods of low surveillance or procedural gaps. Over the years, investigators pursued leads along those lines and at various times looked at itinerant criminals, individuals with prior violent histories, and persons who moved through the region. More recently, wider investigative interest has focused on particular suspects identified through circumstantial links, but in many instances prosecutors have concluded the available evidence is not yet strong enough to bring charges. That continued inability to produce a prosecutable case against a named abductor, however, does not negate the plausibility of the scenario. It underscores the limits of the evidentiary record. Pulling these threads together yields a set of sobering conclusions. The allegations that the parents were involved in concealing a death require extraordinary proof. Proof that, when measured against standards normally applied in criminal prosecutions, is not publicly evident. Cadaver dog alerts produced investigatory momentum, but did not in themselves deliver the kind of forensic confirmation that would definitively tie the parents to a body. Complex DNA results, where they exist, have been described as mixtures and difficult to interpret confidently. The actions of a prominent former investigator, including public accusation and commercial publication, have muddied the public record and raised questions about motive and objectivity. Investigative tunnel vision, missing CCTV, and the natural limitations of human memory all compounded the challenge of constructing a clear, evidence-driven timeline. None of this resolves the human tragedy at the center of the story. A missing child and a family whose life has been irreparably altered. The responsible conclusion is not to assert certainty where evidence is thin, but to demand rigor. Extraordinary allegations require extraordinary proof. Where proof is lacking, alternate explanations, including an opportunistic abductor with local knowledge, remain viable and deserve thorough, methodical investigation. The public should be wary of accepting sensory impressions, rehearsed phrases, or dramatic scent alerts as substitutes for corroborated forensic findings. The core lessons are straightforward. Inconsistencies and alert signals should be treated as leads that demand verification, not as standalone verdicts. Behaviors that look suspicious in isolation can have innocent explanations when placed in the full evidentiary context. Claims from interested or commercially motivated parties should be subjected to careful scrutiny. And above all, investigative work must prioritize neutral, contemporaneous records, and rigorous forensic procedures to produce findings that can withstand public and legal scrutiny. Until such rigorous, independently verifiable evidence emerges, the case remains unresolved. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann continues to be a painful, unresolved mystery, one that calls for patient, objective inquiry rather than rushes to judgment.